Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, here to another House of the Dragon after show. And god damn it, that is a show. I'll tell you what, right now, I've got some thoughts. I don't want to do the unfair comparison, but I'm gonna do the unfair comparison. You're gonna hear it later on, and you already know what I'm talking about, I'm sure. But goddamn, that was a great episode. And I'll tell you what, I do have John Knight with me here before I get into it. John, how you doing? What do you think of that episode? Your quick initial thought,
Show's so damn good.
right?
I
It's
I
fucking
mean,
good, dude. It's so good.
you can tell people that have done it before and know what they're doing versus
Right.
people that are trying to find their way. Oh, so good. Like,
Not
yeah,
their
we'll get
first
into it.
rodeo.
No.
Not at all. Dude, honestly, my favorite thing, one of my favorite things about this episode, and the writing, this is like a tribute to the writing staff too. And it might have something to do with the fact that, we're familiar with this world, sure, like I get all that stuff, but the fact that the show has the balls and the faith in the audience to just understand that they're gonna be along for the ride when they do a 2-year time jump in the matter of an episode. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because that's not a easy thing to do for the audience, nor for the writing team, you know what I mean? Because they have to anybody could just do a time jump, but when you do that, you run the risk of just people not understanding what's going on, not understanding that there was a time jump, not being able to fill in the gaps of like, well, what happened to Rhaenyra during the 2 years? How's she feeling? What happened? Where's Viserys at? Where's all this? XYZ. There's a lot of characters here. And for them to do a 2-year time jump, you run the risk of a lot of that being unexplained and people being lost. But I'm not lost. I know exactly where everyone's at, and that's a testament to the
Definitely.
writing team rather. And like I said, sure, it might be a little bit of the fact that, we're all familiar with this world. We've lived in it for quite some time with Game of Thrones, and then there's obviously books that support everything that's happened. So if you're a book reader, you're not going to be lost. But nevertheless, I think that is just a huge triumph for like any writing team to do. What did the 2-year time jump throw you off in any way? Were you right on board? Were you good to go with it? How do you think that worked out?
No, I didn't bump up against it at all. It was made perfect sense for me. I'm gonna actually I there's part of me that's a little bummed because I'm really enjoying these characters and this story. So, I mean, they're blowing through this story awfully quick, and I know that they have a lot of ground to cover and they're doing a lot, but um yeah, the only downside that I can even see out of any of this is just the fact that I I like this story. I like these characters, so I would not mind if they wanted to spend more time getting from, each of these parts to the next. But yeah, it didn't bother me at all. And this episode was so good. Like they can jump 7 years ahead next time if they want. If the episodes are going
Yeah,
to be this
right.
good, like, yeah, yeah, incredible.
Well, that's honestly one of the things too, like, I even told Sarah while we were sitting there watching it, I was like, it's kind of a shame that they're gonna be jumping through time, like, so quickly, because I kinda like the actress who's playing Rhaenyra, and it's gonna be a shame to, like, see her go, like, her in particular, she's just kind of one of the standouts, right? Like, I think everyone's doing a pretty great job, but,
Oh
like,
yeah,
I think she's, if anything, like, a standout character as a performer, and she's gonna be gone here soon. We've already seen
sure.
in trailers for this season that the older Rhaenyra is gonna be in here, so it's gonna be interesting,
The same
but
goes for the king too. I mean, this episode of all the characters, I think this episode was centered more around the king and the hardship that he's having with, all these competing ideas about what he should be doing, and I think he did an insanely good job pulling off the just the overwhelming heavy as the head that wears crown, right? So
Mhm.
how much weight is just placed upon him, and how much I love the line. There was a line that he had. I'm damned to fail somebody or piss somebody off in service of pleasing another.
Oh,
It was
yeah.
such a good
Yeah.
line. And it
And it
was
was a
it was just
perfect representation of everything he's done up to this point too.
yeah,
Like, it
yeah,
was just an easy acknowledgement to because we've known that as a viewer.
Mhm.
every decision he has made, even though when you like on its surface, it was a good decision and it was like a safe decision, I guess you could say in a lot of ways. But in the end, when we're able to see everyone else's point of view, we know he's not making the best choices, right? Because we know exactly what kind is going on. He's just one man to his own self. So I like
Well,
that.
in addition, there's the inherent, I don't know if this inherent irony of the fact that his own appointment, his own ascending to the throne was in a case of one person being pleased and another being disappointed. I mean,
Yep.
he took the throne under the same circumstances that he is now faced with doing virtually every time he makes a decision. So
Hmm.
it's yeah, it just plays off each other just beautifully. It's so well done.
Yeah, it was very well done. That was on like I think that was probably my favorite episode of the series so far, and because kind of you got a little bit of everything, right? There was probably the most dragon action, obviously, in that episode. There was the most action. We had a battle, right? We had a little battle of the bastards kind of battle, not as feet on the ground, but
Mhm.
like Damon being a pimp. Like, and before I forget too, just I don't want to jump ahead to this scene by any means, but when he receives the letter from the king, from his brother, right? As soon as he receives that letter and he starts beating the crap out of the dude,
Yep.
it was so funny because I know in my mind, I understand Damon as a character, but all these people here, they don't really understand him as a character, right? They have only seen him as this leader who has essentially been in their eyes, failing them, right? Because they've been losing this battle. They're all putting the blame on Damon. You even saw Corliss's brother like explicitly putting the blame on Damon. And me understanding Damon as a character, I'm not sure if you picked up on this right away either, but nevertheless, as soon as he reads that letter and it's from the king, so everyone else is probably sitting there assuming like, thank God, like this is it. We're gonna get aid from the king, like Jesus Christ, yay. But
We're gonna
then
have a chance to win.
yeah,
Yeah.
right, like, finally and not to mention in the back of some of their minds, they're probably like, "Thank God, like, Damon's been fucking this up, and, like, now we're actually gonna get some help from the king, God," like, yes. But as soon as he starts beating the shit out of this squire dude, everybody here just assumed that the king isn't sending them help, and the king is, like, recognizing his frustration that they see in Damon, and they're like, fuck, we're fucked. Like, and they even show a couple of them right after he beats the shit out of a dude, and they just look like, well, goddamn, we're all fucked, aren't we? Like, why else would he have just started beating the shit out of them? That obviously must have been bad news in that letter. Like, oh
Mhm.
no. But I knew right away, like, nah, he's just pissed that in the end, Viserys is gonna send the army, they're gonna save the day, and then he's gonna be left there with his tail between his legs and forever looked at as the guy who failed this war, the guy who lost and needed Viserys and needed the crown and needed their army to come in and save him. That's why when this next scene happens and he rows this little boat out there, he'd rather die than live with that. And like I really do think that I didn't know for sure, and I still am not. I think it's supposed to be ambiguous, but, like, I'm not 100% sure if that was actually planned with the cavalry to come in the end and save him. I'm not 100% sure. Like, I think it was kinda left up for interpretation in a lot of ways. Because even in the after show thing when they were talking about it, one of the guys even said that, like, for all intents and purposes, Damon was supposed to die there if the cavalry didn't arrive.
Yeah.
So, it seems like my initial thought of him just wanting to do this because he'd rather die than have to live with that and, like, so fucking be it, and, like, Matt Smith even says the same thing, like, part of him's like, he just at this point, he just he'd rather die. Like, and it's like, God damn it, hell yes.
So, okay, so that if there's one negative and like this is kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel to find something that I didn't like or didn't or that didn't hit quite right for me for this episode. It was who was that? Whose dragon was that? Who was that that came in?
Oh, and that's Corliss's son.
because he's a dragon rider?
Yeah, Corliss's son and daughter are both dragon riders. I forget their names right now, but they both are
Okay,
dragon riders, yeah. And now with the
okay,
2-year jump, it's a new actor, and they really did age him up a little bit in that 2-year time period, but yeah,
okay.
so that was him coming in on his dragon,
Okay,
Corliss's
see,
son.
we hadn't seen him on his dragon yet, I don't
No, we
think,
have
in the
not.
show, and
No.
so he shows up, and I wasn't sure exactly if it was him or if it was somebody that we just hadn't seen, a dragon that we hadn't seen, because clearly it was a different dragon. It was not Damon's dragon. It didn't have the real long neck. I kept waiting for Damon's dragon to show up. I thought Damon's dragon would show up to save him, that they would have that connection, that the dragon would be like,
Well,
"Oh
dude,
shit, he's in trouble.
to
I'm
that
gonna
point,
go."
did you catch when at the very beginning during the fight when
The
Damon got
wing blocking the
well,
wing
not
blocking the arrows?
that, but when Damon got hit by the arrow, the dragon squealed too, and then that's when he
Oh,
flew
okay.
away. So, like, I interpreted as that as, like, literally like, "Oh, shit," like, the dragon knew that he just got hit. Like,
There's
they
almost
had
some sort of, like, symbiotic
Yeah.
relationship between them. Yeah.
Yeah, like, exactly. Because then it was right after he got shot, the dragon squealed, and
Mhm.
then he flew away, so, like, he knew that, like, Damon got hit. So then when back to your point, when Damon was laying there looking up at the sky after he got hit with 3 more arrows, I in the back of my mind kinda thought like, "Well, where's Caraxes? Like, he just got hit, he should know if he knew before, he probably knows now." And he didn't show up, but old Corliss's son did save the day, so we did get that, so that's fine. And I did think, since we're on the topic, I love that Damon sees the crab feeder go into the cave, and he just runs right in after him. And I honestly don't know if I can show this on YouTube, so I might not want to show that actually. So, I don't know what they would do. Like, I know Twitch is real weird about body dismemberment and like even like blood. You can't show blood. YouTube's not as
Really?
bad about like that. Yeah, so, like but I don't know if I show a dismembered corpse if, that'll be good, but I love that you don't see the fight between Damon and
No. Yeah.
Crabfeeder. He just comes out with a severed corpse, and that's it. Like, it's just like, it's fucking done, which is kind of ironic because if I remember correctly, like, the Crabfeeder isn't some, like, big bad arch enemy in the book or anything, it's just kinda something that happens. So it was kind of interesting that they were kind of making it seem like it was a really big deal for the show, but it kinda
Mhm.
winds up just being this event that allows kinda Damon to kinda bolster up his own reputation coming out of it now, more so than anything.
Mhm.
That's what I'm taking away from it, at least.
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, that clearly establishes him, like, as the, before the king could come save him, he's the badass that actually wins the thing by charging in there.
Oh, yeah, he
Um,
he got shit done.
yeah. Well, I mean, Rhaenyra has the comment in the previous episode about her dragon being very cross if anything happens to her when she goes to confront Damon to get the dragon egg back. She says something to the commander, because the commander almost makes the hand almost makes some comment like, he implies that they should remove the princess from the situation, and she
Mhm.
just kind of walks past him and goes, "Yeah, I can't remember what her dragon's name is, but he doesn't take
Cyrax.
kindly. Irax,
Cyrax, like the Mortal Kombat
Cyrax. Okay,
character, yeah.
okay, Cyrax. Cyrax doesn't take kindly to people if I'm in trouble or something. So like I thought that's so I was waiting for Damon's dragon to show up there. And then when the other dragon shows up that I haven't seen before, I'm like, who the fuck is this? I was like, is this Rhaenyra? Did she like come there first? Is this the king? Is the king on his dragon? Did the king get there in time? Or and so I was trying to piece together what that was. But then all the other the cavalry from Damon's own army showed up, and I was like, "Ah, so I don't think it's anybody from King's Landing there yet." But yeah,
Yeah.
that aside, like that was a small quibble. Like I bumped up against it a little bit. I was like, "Who is it?" But it didn't bother me at all. Like I was just so invested in the episode that it was just like, "This is awesome."
See, I could see, like I knew that his kids were dragon riders, and they made a point, and to your point, they never I don't think they mentioned that in the show. They may have, but it's hard for me to remember because I just already know that they're dragon riders, but I don't know
Yeah.
if they ever actually did mention it. They did have that scene where in the last episode when Viserys was courting the 12-year-old girl, Like,
Mhm.
she brings up Vhagar, so you know she's interested in dragons at the very least, but I don't
Yeah.
in that scene that she never mentions that she rides X Dragon at that current time by any means, but,
Well, and
uh
it makes a lot more sense because there's the comment earlier, like, "We can keep bombing them or we can keep attacking them with dragons, they're just gonna keep retreating to the caves," and they say dragons plural, and at the time, I was going, "What other dragons are there? Damon's got a dragon. Who are these other dragons?" I think it would have been. I mean, obviously, it would have been more money because they would have had to CGI a dragon or whatever. But it would have maybe even that opening scene where they're attacking the
if
crab
they
feeders
showed
and they
another
keep
one.
retreating. If they showed another, exactly, maybe Damon trades off with one or something. Like I understand they get the whole thing about Damon and Damon getting hit and Damon being kind of um, the one that's pushing the battle.
Mhm.
So I understand why they chose Damon for that scene, but it would have been nice if maybe they would have thrown. But again, I this is like a very minor quibble in an otherwise amazing episode.
See, now
I
this
would
is
put.
why this scene is where I knew that it was he was there and that his dragon would be there too, because during this scene, god damn it, I forget dude's name, but he sent when he tells the king that he should wed Rhaenyra to Corlys Valerian's son Laenor,
Mhm.
he goes on to say if he survives the battle because he's down in the step zones right now. So, so like in my mind, I already knew he was there. So his dragon was
Okay,
there and it was ready
okay.
to go. So like if you knew that ahead of time, which again, I don't know if they mention it in the show at all. So meh. But since I knew that, I knew he was there. So that didn't happen to me. But I could totally see I do think it would have probably been better for them to show both dragons like there in the beginning and then
Mhm.
because that's one thing that they I don't think they did a great job with was showing how the fuck they were actually able to withstand Damon's dragon on his own, let alone 2 dragons, right?
Yeah.
Because like, they show in the beginning that they're retreating to the caves, and, like, that's fine, but they can't stay in the caves all the time, and if they're just retreating in the caves, then they can't be attacking people on the shores or at sea. So, once they would have retreated to the caves, in the real world, that would have been a natural bottleneck and they would die because they need to come out of the cave at some point. So all they would need to do is fly above the cave on both dragons, just circling, waiting for anyone to come out, and then burn them.
Well, shit, they could have set up
Like,
camp up above the caves with the dragons and
yeah,
just,
exactly.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's some logistics there that didn't quite hit right. I'm not sure if I was assuming the caves are like an entire network and maybe they have rations stashed in there for, years worth of to hold out and maybe there was
It's a
I
small
don't know.
nitpick for sure.
Yeah, maybe the caves go to some other part of the island or land that they're able to retreat to. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, like you said, small and the dragons. That's the other thing we don't know about the dragons because I mean, in how in Game of Thrones, the dragons were kind of they were there and they were used, but they've never established, like, how long can the dragons fly? Are these things like do they need to take breaks? Like, after an hour of flying, are the dragons kind of tired? Do they need a break? Like, can they go all day? Like,
How much
what's the
fire
deal?
can they
How much
breathe?
fire can they breathe? How often do they have to eat? Like, do they sleep every day? Like, is it, there's a lot of questions about dragons, and they probably don't wanna answer them because then it's more convenient when they wanna use them in a certain way. You start
Mhm.
establishing too many rules about the dragons, then you can find yourself pigeonholing yourself into situations.
Yeah, that's exactly what I said the other day about the MCU and always having interconnected stuff. It's like sometimes it's better just to leave things disconnected so you can just do whatever you want later on. You
Yeah,
explain everything, and then it's like, oh, but we can't do that because, in this XYZ episode, we said this one thing. So if we don't adhere to that thing, that decision we made a year ago, like now we can't do this cool thing.
yeah,
And that's, like, the inherent problem with it, being a little bit too nitpicky about all that stuff. So you just gotta kinda suspend your disbelief a little bit more when we're already watching a fantasy show with dragons and all that stuff. I just kind of accept it and I just try to enjoy what I'm seeing as long as it's good.
sure.
Like And by golly, this was a great episode, man.
Yeah, this
There was
I would
so much.
I actually I don't have I have all the lights off. I just watched the show when it's on. I don't have any kind of frame of reference for how much time has passed while I'm watching this. And I thought we got to the end of the whole hunt for Aegon's name day, and I thought that was going to be the end of the episode. Honestly, I thought that maybe they would pick up the next episode with the with the cavalry coming to help out Damon. I thought Damon wasn't even going to be in this episode besides that opening vignette there. I thought the entire episode was just going to be about the name day. And I was perfectly fine with it. Like I didn't need a big action set pieces. So when you threw this in at the end, when they went and threw this part in, I was just over the moon. I was just like, oh my, I was just, yeah, it was
Yeah,
everything
it
I
was
love
just,
about Game of,
and
everything
oh
I love
wait,
about Game
there's
of Thrones.
more. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It was like, holy shit, they're actually going to do this whole bit too, huh? This is amazing. Like, because I thought for sure, I thought it felt like enough, an entire episode had passed with all the various, you know, things that happened during the hunt. You even got like the kind of like pacing of the story with them finding the boar and then tracking the boar and then saying they were close to getting not the boar, the stag. They found the stag. They tracked the stag. They told them that the stag was close. That kind of like paced out the episode. You had everything in between, but that was like the trail that you were following through the episode. And then he kills the stag, and I thought, okay, we're at the end of the episode. They're going back to King's Landing. That was the episode was about the hunt, and this is perfectly good. It was so good, I enjoyed it, and then we get that on top of it. It was just like, yeah, this is peak Game of Thrones right here.
and what was great about all this stuff too is because like during this time with like the hunt and everything, and this was again a testament to the writers. Um, like the whole time we're sitting here and we're knowing that there's people at at court who have doubts, and Viserys starts to doubt whether he made the right choice in naming Rhaenyra as the heir. And then Otto even whispers in his ear about when the white stag is seen, like, Your Grace, if there was ever any sign from the gods, like, this
Yeah,
is it to name name Aegon your successor, your heir at this point. And like all this stuff. So he's had all this stuff going on in his head. So now he's believing this prophecy because he already had his own prophecy that he talks about in front of the fire, where like he saw his son with the crown. Like he saw this vision. And then now there's this other prophecy with like the stag and all these things. And it's just funny because we see later on that who gets the first kill of the hunt? It was Rhaenyra. It wasn't the
hmm
white stag, but she gets the first kill, and
hmm
it's with her own hands. She does it herself. Granted,
hmm
dude was
She
there
gets an
too.
assist from the night. Yeah.
Yeah, but like still, she comes back with blood on her, with the boar, and it is
hmm
what it is. But just before that, she sees the white stag, but she decides not to try to kill it. So
hmm
in a lot of ways, she's even more superior than the prophecy. You know what I mean? Because it's like she got the first kill, she had a chance to get the white stag, she decides not to. She could have came back with boar and potentially white stag in hand, and then everybody's fucking jaws would have been even further firmly pressed to the floor. They would have been questioning everything they thought about any doubts they had about her taking the throne, which they already kind of did with her coming back with the boar as it was. And I
Yeah.
liked all that.
Yeah. That was yeah.
And then
Yeah.
what were you gonna say?
It's just nice that they're building that inherent. The conflict isn't going to be just among the. It's nice to show those little like the looks that she was getting coming back into camp because it shows you that when the inevitable conflict comes up between Damon, her, and Aegon, it's not just going to be a conflict among them. It's going to be a conflict among the people. It's going to be a conflict among those in King's Landing. It's going to be a conflict among the entire realm as to who actually should be the heir or should be the ruler.
Oh yeah, it's gonna be interesting because especially depending on how much further they jump in time, right? And this is obviously I've already established this long ago. I've read the books. I don't remember the books, and I intend to keep it that way because I just want to be surprised. So this is just purely me guessing, like literally. Do I have a subconscious influence? Maybe, but I genuinely don't know. But I'm just interested and curious to see kind of where it goes from here because you're gonna with the time jump, we don't know how far it's gonna jump and what kind of if Rhaenyra in this time jump has decided to take a husband, right? Then she's
Mhm.
gonna have her own kinda new supporters behind her. And now Damon, after winning this big battle, he's gonna have a ton of supporters behind him at this point. And then Aegon, depending on how far this time jump is, he's gonna be pretty old. If they jump 5, 6, 7 years, he'll be old enough in a couple years to be king in his own right. So, like, there's gonna be and that so pretty much anybody who supports Viserys, in some ways, will be supporting Aegon because you're gonna have those people who don't support Rhaenyra. So, like, there's gonna be that, and it's gonna be interesting to see what happens.
I don't. I just to establish. I think what's going like. I think that there was a comment in the last episode or in the next on part where they say this babe of three. So I'm assuming it's just going to be like a year jump to the next whatever the next part is. Because I think in the next time on they say that the Aegon's three at
Oh,
that
yeah, for
point.
Aegon being 3, that makes
Yes.
sense.
Yeah.
Well,
So I
and
think we'll
also,
just get
it's
a
funny
year.
because that also applies to the people out for the crown. Rhaenyra, Aegon, and Daemon. There's 3 there.
Yeah.
So it's actually kind of an
Yeah, well, and
interesting dichotomy.
everything you said still holds. It's just I just since we weren't sure how far it's jumping, I think that they said I could be wrong too. I could have misheard that,
Oh,
but
no, in the
I think
next
it's a year jump.
episode, sure, but that
Okay.
the obviously, Viserys isn't gonna be dead next episode. So when
No.
that time comes and there's an actual, quote, unquote, "war for the crown," we don't know how far ahead they're gonna jump for that, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
And that could be like I said, I don't know. It's long enough in time for them to change out the actresses. I mean, we
Yeah.
know that much. So it'll
Yeah,
probably
that's
be like a 10, 15 year jump whenever it
yeah.
does happen.
Yeah, that's where I'm really like this entire like I don't this I'm not sure what the intent of this show like how, as far as will it have multiple seasons? And if it is intended to have multiple seasons, I'm actually really disappointed because we're going to pass over the amount of time that we have with this version of Rhaenyra very quickly in the scope of things. If this series goes on for 3, 4, 5 seasons, but we're going to lose this actress that played her within the first season, like that's going to be pretty disappointing to me because I think she's doing an excellent job. I think she's knocking it out of the park, and I really like the way she.
The exact same thing I said to Sarah earlier. I said
Yeah,
it was literally the same comment about her, about
yeah,
Rhaenyra, the actress playing Rhaenyra. Because like I really do think she is one of the more standout uh performances. But
hmm
honestly, because they've given her a lot to do. Like,
hmm
she's
no,
essentially been,
definitely,
like, in a lot of ways, the main character so far. Because this was, like you brought this up earlier, this was really Viserys's first time he got to shine. Like, I
oh yeah,
thought because it was so funny at the beginning of the episode, he was talking yeah, it was at the very beginning when he's just sitting there at court, and people are coming up to him and trying to talk like the Lannister guy comes up and is like, the Stepstone battles, like, and he's just like, hey, buddy, it's been going on for 3 years. What's 3 more days? Okay, chill the fuck
yeah,
out. So I'm just sitting there, was like, this fucking guy, dude. Like, he's such aloof. He has no idea what the hell. He's not really fit for this. He makes all the best decisions like every decision he makes. Like I said earlier, they're good decisions. But when you
mhm,
take a step back, they're terrible decisions. Like, it's just not a good idea.
yeah,
So I'm just sitting here like, oh man, this is just, ooh, he's just not doing great. But then as the episode, like later on, after he has his drunken stint and all his doubts and he fights through that, like, dude, he mans up. Like he
mhm,
takes ownership of all the shitty decisions he's made in a lot of ways, but then he sticks with them, which is commendable. Maybe not the smartest thing, but, like, he has that conversation with Rhaenyra later on, and it's just like, "Yo, it's still you." Like,
yeah.
Like, it's
Yeah,
still you.
definitely.
I'm like, and like that, yeah, that takes some stones. That takes
And
some
he
stones.
not only does he reaffirm that it's her, he actually lays out the path for her to make it easier on herself by saying,
Mhm.
"Look, you need to find somebody to marry to shore up your claim. You need to find somebody that so when it the time comes for you to take over, you can say, look, you're not just getting me, who was named by my father as the heir. You're also getting me plus my husband and whatever connections and support that brings along with him." So he's trying to help her, firm up that aspect of it as well, which I thought was really cool. Because most of the time, or at least what we're led to believe is the offspring have no say in who they're marrying. Their marriages are done by their parents or by the ruling parties, and it's done politically. And he's saying, look, you need to do it politically. You need to get somebody who's going to bring you the support, but you also can navigate that to also hopefully find somebody that makes you happy.
Mhm. And he laid it out pretty well for her too. Like, cause it's like, cause like to your point, he's helping her come to the conclusion on her own, which is exactly what her friend or her old friend told him to do, essentially. So in a way, even Viserys has begun to play the Game of Thrones, even though he's the king. But he finally, like, that's what I was saying, like, he finally just manned up, and like, even though he has made bad decisions, at this point there was like a turn in him, and he's deciding to like, he recognized their bad decisions, but he's not gonna have them perceived as bad decisions anymore, so he's gonna make them work, like, he finally gives in, and he sends reinforcements down to the stepstones, like, he fucking has the conversation with Rhaenyra and, like, says, like, "You do it then, like, I'm just trying to help, you do it, it's still you." Like, he doesn't wanna go back on his decisions because I mean, it would make him look weaker than he's already being perceived, and, like, it's just good to know that he recognizes that. Like, he'd rather stick to this decision, even though, for argument's sake, despite how, like, shitty it may be, in this world, naming Aegon the heir is the easy way out and would be the best decision, right? Not the right decision, not the morally correct decision, but for the sake of the realm, sure. Like Otto was right. That's it for all intents and purposes. That would be the decision you should make at this point. Don't really agree with it, but I wouldn't fault anybody. Like if Viserys was just like, "Yep, Aegon's king now." Everyone would be happy with it. Life would go on. The only person who'd be upset would be Rhaenyra, because she doesn't have an army of supporters behind her. Nobody cares. Again, not the best, like, it's not good, but, I mean, that would be the logical decision, so I like that he's like, "Nah, I'm gonna stick to it, because it's gotta work, because I'm the king, and I said it, so I'm gonna make it work." And, like, so I like that. That's good.
It's interesting to me since we're talking about it's interesting too that they're not shying away from some of the very, very, very uncomfortable parts of the story. The guy proposes that at least if I'm understanding what was being proposed correctly, he proposed that the king betroth Rhaenyra to Aegon at
Yeah,
one point. And
no,
I know that there's the intermarried the marrying among siblings and family members to keep the bloodline pure and stuff. Obviously we did the whole Jamie and Cersei Lannister bit through Game of Thrones. But yeah, they're talking about children, a child of two, and they're not shying away from the incest aspect of it, which it's whew, that's an uncomfortable scene there when they're having that one.
but the funniest thing is, like, no joke, like, in that scene, Otto's right. It's actually a good call. Like,
Sure.
in this world, like, that was, like, the smartest thing he could have said because, like, he knows at this point that Viserys is not comfortable with all these people who think he should just name Aegon, right? So
Mhm.
Otto knows in his mind since he's playing the Game of Thrones, right? His daughter's already the queen. To just best not upset Viserys anymore and to kind of still lean him in a good direction, saying that he should just name Rhaenyra's spouse is uh what's his name? Laenor, I think, yeah, Laenor Valerian, I think is him. Like, that's a fucking genius idea. Or as Aegon, rather. Sorry, that was the other guy. But as Aegon, it was actually a really good idea. It's
Sure.
gross because he's 2 and it's her brother, but it's genius. Like, that
Yeah,
actually would, like, everybody would win. Because then
yeah.
his
Except for Damon.
grandkid,
Except for Damon.
except for
Damon's the only
Daemon,
one
yeah,
that's yeah.
that's
But you're
fair.
you're satisfying 2 of the 3 at that point.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting everything, right? Because now all the people who wanted Aegon to be king,
Get
he's
Aegon.
king. He's got him. He's king.
Everybody that wants Rhaenyra gets Rhaenyra as queen,
Yeah,
so
it's good. So it's the only people who are upset are the people who wanted Daemon, but they're already dead.
yeah.
Like, after all that battle, he only had like 2,000 people like truly behind him. I mean, he'll have other supporters, sure,
Well,
but
and
like
but now after the
now,
battle, yeah,
mhm.
like we said, he's gonna have quite a bit more support.
Yeah, and see, that's what makes it. That's what's gonna make it interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I do know like the next bit that does like come up, and like it's good. It's good. So like
Do you know how many episodes this season is supposed to be? Is
it
it
should
8?
be it should be 10,
Is it
I
10?
think. I think it's 10. And oh yeah, to answer your question before, they said there's going to be 3 or 4 seasons. So they
Okay.
don't know for sure, but they said 3 or 4. So they could decide to stretch that to 5 if they wanted, but they could also decide just to do it in 3 and call it a day. Like,
Yeah.
because it really just depends. Because like they've been like kind of to your point earlier, and like we've been saying, like it's kind of a shame they are jumping so quickly because we're going to lose some people if they wanted to, and as long as they have the material, because that is the kind of thing, like, the source material here does call for these time jumps. Like, they don't spend a lot of time in the source material, like, going over every detail. There's no dialogue. It's just, it was X year and ABC thing happened, and then this happened, and then that lasted for a year. So then, okay, now there's another excerpt, and like that's all the source material really is. So it makes sense that they're doing the time jumps, but it does give them some leeway later on to where if they wanted to ease back and they were confident that they could come up with good fitting, narrative to warrant stretching it out a bit, like I would be fine with that. If they wanted to kind of draw some things out and not jump as much, like I wouldn't care as long as it's just don't linger just to linger. I think it honestly, since it's doing at least since it's as good as it is right now for these 3 episodes, if they're able to keep that up for the 3 seasons, we'll say, or even 4 seasons if we wanna go with, the bigger number, I wouldn't be opposed to them just wrapping this bit up, and then, like they said, if it does well, maybe they'll just do a different era in the House of the Dragon. So, like, maybe they go back and tell that story of Aegon's conquest, or maybe they tell they could just follow this up with because I don't know if there's really a whole lot to tell directly after this story. There's a little bit if they get it because I don't know if they're going to get into the Blackfire Rebellion stuff in this or if that would be kind of where they end it. It seems like that might be a good logical stopping place because that bumps up right up against the beginning of Game of Thrones in a lot of ways. Because that introduces people who are in Game of Thrones while they were younger, like some older characters while they were younger. So I imagine that's kind of their ideal stopping place. Because I don't think they ever kind of intended this to be something that runs directly up to the events of like Ares the Mad King, Daenerys' dad being crowned king, and then like end cut to black. I don't think they were going to be going that far because if they do, like they could, but that would be another 3 seasons worth of content in a lot of ways. That's why I kind
Yeah.
of feel like they're going to stop it before then. But I'd totally be fine with it if they decide to keep telling just keep it going and tell that next bit, because then you would have this like House of the Dragon season 1, 2, 3, 4, and then maybe 4, 5, 6, 7, and then Game of Thrones picks up right after that, like Rogue One right into A New Hope, like boom. I'd be fine with that, and then you could go back and tell Aegon's Conquest. I don't know.
Or they could remake Game of Thrones with a new ending.
No, they should just save that for when George actually finishes the books.
Yeah. I know they'll never do it, but
No, they could. I honestly, no shit, they could do that because they are kind of going to be doing that in a lot of ways if they actually make that Game of Thrones show or the Game of Thrones show, the Jon Snow show, because they're
yeah.
supposedly working on that Jon Snow sequel series. So that kind of leaves the door open for them to tell that story. And then if George actually finishes one of the two books, they could just pick that up, kinda, like, weave that into whatever that story is, and it could take place after Game of Thrones, since they had this fill-in thing in the series, like, obviously not in the books, there's not gonna be a Jon Snow book, but we have Game of Thrones, then we have the Jon Snow series, but then Winds of Winter comes out, and then they could just loop that into the events of Winds of Winter and continue Game of Thrones, now telling the true endings of it, but then there's a whole other book, so A Dream
Yeah.
of Spring, so who the fuck knows? I don't know. I may have gotten those confused, but either way, those are the 2 books.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're ever gonna come out at this point, though, unfortunately. I'm still worried about that. Oh, but man, it was really great. It
If I was a
honestly ugh.
if I was a betting man, I would not take the bet that those books are coming out, which is disappointing
Well,
because it's
it's
such a good series. It's such and I think he has such a unique vision about it. I think he has such a unique way of thinking and constructing that obviously lends itself and maybe that's shared among the people that create this show and so maybe there are other people out there who can keep the tone and the way he tells the story and constructs a story going inevitably when he's when hopefully the stories will continue um so we'll see.
I'm just more or less, I think the biggest problem is I feel like it's a double-edged sword in a lot of ways because we would have Winds of Winter in a Dream of Spring. I think correct me if I'm wrong if those aren't the names. I'm pretty sure those are the names of the books. But we'd have those books. I'd say at least one of them if Game of Thrones never happened, and if House of Dragon never happened, because he would have been spending all that time writing the books. But
You would hope so. I It just
like
takes him a long time to write apparently though, so
yeah, but there was a big 8 to 10-year delay in his writing when he was working with them on Game of Thrones, and now even more so, once Game of Thrones ended, like, he is in, like, much more direct involvement in this show than he was in Game of Thrones, so he's over the last 10 years when Game of Thrones was on, he couldn't really focus on writing because he was doing stuff with the show, and then now he's doing stuff with this. So that's the double edged sword, though, because it's like we would have the books, I'm sure, at least one of them, if Game of Thrones never happened. But then Game of Thrones would never happen, so I don't really think that's a good thing. Like,
yeah.
like despite how Game of Thrones ended, it's still one of the greatest shows like ever made. Like, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. So even well, I don't know. I would still like to have that last book. You know what? No, I would need the show to exist because if the show would didn't exist, I probably would never have read the book. Like I saw the show, then read the books.
Oh, did
So
you?
yeah. So
Okay.
because of how much I loved the show, made me want to read the books.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would obviously it goes to the double-edged sword right there.
Yeah.
But yeah, man,
I
we'll
think I
see.
mentioned this last time. I've held off on reading the books because I want to make sure they finish before I get invested in them. I always wanted my intention was always I always thought that surely by the time the series is over, all the books will be out and it'll just be easy for me to go back and pick up the series, pick up the book,
Mhm.
read them all after I'm done watching this show, and that obviously didn't work. So
sadly was not the case, right?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm looking at Wikipedia here. I've got the white of Wikipedia lighting up my face here, but it's Winds of Winter and
A Dream of Spring, right?
Dream of Spring. Yep, you're right.
So I was right.
Correct.
See, that was my subconscious, like, I keep saying, like, I really don't remember the books, but, like, I remember like, it just, like, I just knew those were the names. Like, if
Sure.
you woulda asked me, like, randomly, I probably may not have been able to tell you because I just truly, like, unfortunately, a lot of the information from the books has escaped my mind. It's been so long since I read them, you know, it's been at least 3 years since I read Fire and Blood because that was a more recent release.
Mhm.
Like, I think it came out, like, 2 or 3
10
years
years ago.
ago. No, Fire and
Oh.
Blood, the show this is based off.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, like, 'cause that was a more recent release, which is
No, no,
interesting, but you should get that well, actually, no, don't get that book because that would spoil this entire show, so I was gonna
yeah.
say you should just get that because that gives you a lot of information about the world, and it's just one book, it's not like a long book, but then you would
We
know
we
everything that happens.
we've had discussions, especially on our other stream, about how hard of a time I have finding time just to keep up with the shows that we have, let alone throwing starting to throw novels and books in there. So my hope is that one day when hopefully I have some more free time, after life slows down maybe a little bit, I will be able to go back and read these books and relive these stories through the books eventually. And so I look gives me something to look forward to.
Dude, if you gotta drive into work still, right? You gotta go in the office to work, yeah?
I do, yeah.
Get the
I
audiobooks.
I lose an hour of my day every day to driving,
Get
so
the audiobooks.
that's a
Seriously,
good
the
point. Yeah,
original ones. That's what I did with, the first books, the original series books, because
yeah,
I spent up to 2 hours driving into to and from work. So
mhm,
I just started getting all the original books on Audible, and, like, I got through all of them just
yeah,
driving back and forth. It was great. It honestly, that was the best times I had being stuck in traffic because at least I, like, had entertainment happening at the
sure,
same time, you know?
yeah,
I did the same thing with a lot of the Star Wars books too, ironically, and the Star Wars books are probably some of the best audiobooks because they put, like, full production into it. You hear, like, beep beep boop sounds in the
yeah, oh, yeah,
background.
yeah.
They're really good.
I've
The
no,
Game of Thrones
I've
ones aren't as good, but production value-wise, but
I've enjoyed the audiobooks. I do that occasionally. Every few months, I'll pick one up and listen to it. I always enjoy it. But I also like there's podcasts I listen to and shit. So I don't know.
mhm.
It's just juggling. There's just a lot of stuff out there. So
There's too much content anymore.
and here we are adding to it.
I know, right? It's crazy. It's wondrous times, but it's also that in and of itself is also a double-edged sword because it's like, "Oh, man, we have so much stuff we can watch. This is all there's 2 high fantasy shows. Like, oh my god, look at all these Marvel movies." But then you remember that there's only so many hours in a day. Like, you just this comes to a point where, like, you just don't have time to even catch up with all the shit that's out there. It's
Yeah.
crazy. Like, there's so much, like, stuff that, like, I would probably like, but I can't, like, I never watch Better Call Saul, and I love Breaking Bad.
Oh,
I
good.
there's too much other stuff out there. Like, I just never got around it's not like I don't wanna watch it. I'm sure I would love it, and a lot of people say that, like, the later seasons and, like, the finale, the show ended up being better than Breaking Bad, some people say, which is shocking to hear as someone who has obviously seen Breaking Bad numerous times at this point, but, yes, there's just so much stuff out there, it's insane, man.
Yeah,
Crazy.
definitely. We've made it through this entire episode and we have not
It was on my mind, I know what you're
we
gonna
have not
say.
talked about Lord of the Rings
I
and
knew that's what you were
we
gonna
have
say.
not we have
I
not
literally
compared the 2.
it was on my
Which is
mind.
which is good. I mean, I think it's kinda good in a way. We have a Lord of the Rings discussion that we just filmed that we just did last night. People can
Mhm.
see what we thought, but, I you know,
It's not
there's clearly a difference between this one and
I mean,
watching those watching
to put it plainly, one's good.
one's very good.
Like,
One's
I'm
very
like, and
good.
it's not like it's not saying one's bad, I'm just saying, like, one's really good.
Really good.
Like,
Yeah.
that's all I'm
So
saying, like Another one's there.
It's
It's a
something.
show.
Mhm.
It's a really expensive show. But then,
It
like,
has
there's
it
a
has some
really good one, though.
yeah, it has some good points.
No, I and that's the thing, I feel like it's and that's kinda what I was like, it goes with what I was saying earlier too, like, a lot right at the start of the stream, like, I give the writers for House of the Dragon a lot of credit because they don't cater to the audience in a lot of ways. Like they don't think we're stupid. They have the confidence to take a 2-year time jump and just assume everyone's going to be on board. And there might be people who aren't. Like you didn't know who that the second dragon was. So
Mhm.
there's going to be other people who just don't follow like what's going on. Like you know it's going to happen, but it takes some balls to even wanna do that, but for them to be able to execute it in a way to where, like I mean, there's me, I knew exactly what was going on. Granted, again, I've read the books, so, like, it'd be really hard for me just to be 100% lost at any point in time, but I like that, and, with Lord of the and you also have the bit where we've spent 10 years in this world already, right?
Mhm.
Like, there's plenty like, everyone kinda knows Game of Thrones, you know, where but at the same time, I do have to say, everybody knows Lord of the Rings. I mean, we spent, like, almost 10 years with those movies production-wise, right, in some ways.
Sure.
Granted, they were able to, uh, not have to stagger out the release that much since they filmed them all at the same time, but there was still, like, 1 or 2 years between the release of all the movies. So there's plenty of people who are at least familiar with those movies, and then obviously there's tons of people familiar with the books, probably not as much that are familiar with the movies, but nevertheless, I don't know, I want Lord of the Rings to be good. I would
Yeah.
love for Lord of the Rings to be as good as this show.
I have
I don't
I
know if it will.
I have a question about that. I actually, but before I get into it, we actually have we have some people watching right now. I'm curious what if there's anything that we haven't touched upon that anybody that's watching had a comment on or wanted us to touch upon. It would be nice to see some interaction with some of the viewers if they have any questions for us.
For sure.
But while we see if anybody has anything for us, the do you think that Lord of the Rings would be do you think Lord of the Rings running concurrently with House of Dragon is going to end up hurting it just because of the immediate for me it's an immediate comparison. I jumped
Oh, yeah.
basically right from seeing Lord of the Rings into House of Dragons. Yesterday Lord of the Rings, today House of Dragons. Do you think they would be better served having that series run in the spring, and then House of Dragon runs in the fall, they run in the spring, and then you've got some buffer in between the two, and so you're not as you're not as conscious of how good House of Dragons is, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it. Um, and you can enjoy Lord of the Rings more on its own merits.
I'll tell you
Yeah.
what, as someone who inherently will say that I like the world of Game of Thrones more than the world of Lord of the Rings. Just
Hmm.
I just like the world more.
Sure.
There's nothing I want more than to be able to watch an episode of that Lord of the Rings show and say, "Holy shit, that was better than fucking House of the Dragon." Like, I want to see the show be that good because I just want another good show. And if I can have
Hmm.
another good show that is, like, high fantasies with fucking even more like, Game of Thrones is not high fantasy. Like, I've said this before, Game of Thrones puts the fantasy stuff in the back seat. It's all political drama, like, and that's it's just real, right? Like, again, I brought this kind of up before when the first or second whenever the orgy happened, I made the comparison, like, we're not gonna see an orgy in Lord of the Rings. That's just not
Sure.
the kind of world that it is. We're not gonna see
Sure.
all this we're not gonna see Damon or any character like, Aragon's not gonna walk out of the woods with a torso. Like, that's just not the kind of world that that show is, right? And that's fine. I just want it to be good. But to your point, I don't know if it would be better or worse because I think the comparison will always be there.
Yeah,
because it's entering the medium of television, and for the last 10 years, Game of Thrones has been really the only show you could even consider to be like a high fantasy show that's even been on that I'm not gonna say it's only been on, but that's at least been good, and to reach, like, a global phenomenon kind of thing, like, that doesn't happen. Like,
yeah,
Game of Thrones was like lightning in a bottle just for how, like, good and successful it became, right? Because not everything becomes like a zeitgeist show. Not everything is a Stranger Things, not everything is a Breaking Bad or a like, that stuff doesn't happen. So and that's part of why I always say, like, I preface anything when I talk about House of Dragon versus Lord of the Rings, where, like, it's inherently an unfair comparison, but it's also not,
mhm,
because, like, especially when you know that realistically, if you wanna be real, Game of Thrones wouldn't exist without Lord of the Rings.
sure,
Like, George R. R. Martin, I can guarantee you would not have came up with this exact same story had Tolkien not written Lord of the Rings. Like,
mhm,
Lord of the Rings was, like, the framework for our modern high fantasy. So, the comparison, rightfully in a lot of ways, should be there. Even as unfairly or fairly as it should be, because it was the same if Lord of the Rings came out and it was 10 times better than Game of Thrones, people would be having the same conversation, just in reverse, you
sure.
know? And, like but in the end, I don't know, I feel like it's an unfair comparison just because, like, fundamentally, they're different, but at the same time, they're so uniquely intertwined that, like, the comparison, whether they were cycling through their releases or they're running concurrently, I honestly think best case scenario would be for them to have it running concurrently just because they could feed off the hype. Like, since people are so into House of the Dragon, it would make them want to watch another show like that
I
when
could see that. I
because if the show was shit and it was the only thing on, they just wouldn't watch it.
yeah.
But
I
now they
think
could come back to it.
I think it might be a case of differing for different people. I personally think I would enjoy the Lord of the Rings show more, if I wasn't so tends to mute how emotions and feelings, for me, especially. And so, like we were just talking about Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad, I remember how much I loved Breaking Bad. I remember how just mind-blowing I thought that show was and how incredible I thought virtually every episode was. And when I go back and watch it, I'm again taken right back to those same feelings and emotions. But, I haven't seen Breaking Bad in probably a couple years at this point, and I'm not as hyped and as excited and as invested in that story as I am when I'm in it, when I'm currently watching it. So even a few months later, I feel how good Game of Thrones is right now, or how good House of Dragons is. Like we got done watching this episode, and I can't stop talking about how good it is. Um, and so I think I would be better served having a break and having Lord of the Rings, having Rings of Power be a few months after the end of House of Dragon, just so I'm not as conscious of how good a high fantasy show could be. And then I think I would enjoy it just a little bit more because I wouldn't be making those I would make those comparisons. Eventually, I'm sure I would go back and say, "Oh yeah, they did a really good job." But the emotional aspect of it wouldn't be as intense, I think, and would help serve Rings of Power for me at least a little more.
I feel like I think that's valid. I think you would have more room to breathe and more time to reflect. I think the comparisons would be less if they weren't running concurrently, you wouldn't have people immediately going well, this wasn't as good as House of the Dragon. Like, well, if it was running by itself, you probably wouldn't get that, but I think, like, inherently, like, in the back of people's minds, they would still think that. Like, it might not be the topic of discussion, but I think it would still happen. That's why I think, like, it's probably best for them to feed off the hype, 'Cause
Yeah,
even George
no,
R.
that's a perfect rationale for it.
Yeah, because
And
like,
I'm
even George said, like, the same when he was asked, because like, he got asked the same question, like, "What do you think about, like, Rings of Power? Is it gonna be running at the same time as, your show, House of the Dragon?" And he said the same thing I said, ironically. It's just like, he just wants it to be good because then, like, we all win, which is the
yeah,
same thing Kevin Feige says about DC. Like, whenever he gets asked about DC, it's just like, "Dude, I want DC movies to be good because if DC movies are bad, people lose interest in it. It just
yeah,
it's they're inherently they're compared and contrasted no matter what. So if they're doing good, that means people are interested in those kind of movies. The minute what like a comic book movie is just they just suck and everyone doesn't like it. They're gonna start thinking that all comic book movies are like that. That's just
yeah,
how we work, like as a society. It's just like comic book movie bad was like flip on in people's head because they just went and saw all these DC movies or all these Marvel movies and they're just bad. So then it's, they just lose interest in it. But if Lord of the Rings is the greatest thing since sliced bread and House of the Dragon's good, then everyone's gonna be into it and vice versa,
sure,
you know?
yeah.
So I think they probably hedged their honestly, it makes me kind of worried though. Now that I'm thinking about it, because maybe they knew the show wasn't that good and knew that they like their best bet was to run it alongside the House of Dragon.
Yeah, there's also a part of me that believes I honestly believe that maybe I'm misjudging the guy. I hardly know anything about him, but there's part of me that wonders if Jeff Bezos, his ego wasn't in this, and like, oh, they think they can, I can do a show. I'm the richest guy in the world. Watch this. I'm gonna, I don't know.
Eh, I wonder how much I like because like money aside, I really like I don't follow what Jeff Bezos does, but the fact that they were able to get as much money as they got poured into this, you have to imagine Jeff Bezos had to okay that. So he
Oh,
had
sure.
some inkling of getting this show made, like no doubt. But like
Well, and he's been all over. Like I've seen the quote multiple times just over the past few days, where he apparently like the quote that they're attributing to him, or at least to his son, is that like when he told his son that he was thinking about doing it, his son said, "Oh, don't f it up, don't fuck it up." So um, he's been front and center with the release of it and everything. So kind of assumed and that may be just me unfairly, biasly thinking that a guy that has billions of dollars and is either at any given moment the richest guy in the world, just would have an ego the size of whatever, and would want to say like, "Oh yeah, how Game of Thrones, yeah, really popular. Well, guess what? I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it better." So
yeah, we'll see. That's the thing though. That kind of goes to my point too, where it's just like if you're even thinking that, you don't understand the material.
yeah,
Because dude, like they are so different. Like Game of Thrones is that's why I just constantly say it's an unfair comparison. Like they are fundamentally different. They both have things that look like dragons. They both have dragons, I guess you could say, because there are actual dragons. It's just funny, like the thing that the Nazgul ride like aren't really dragons, but like in the original Lord of the Rings, that's all we got were those
mhm,
the things that the Nazgul rode. Which if you wanna call them dragons, fine, but, like, that's a dragon, that's a dragon. The thing the Nazgul rode, they aren't really dragons, like, you can call them dragons, but that wasn't a dragon. Like, I never really cared for the design of that, but then Smaug is like, "That's a dragon." It's like,
sure,
that's a dragon. But, like,
sure.
that's, like, it when, like, you look at it, like, like, Lord of the Rings has elves, they have literal
Dwarves,
magic, they have magical rings, they have orcs, they have hobbits, they have all like, it is so much more high fantasy in, like, so many ways. Lord in Game of Thrones is just, like, a medieval political setting, and there are some dragons and some mysticism.
yeah.
That's it. Like, it's just so fundamentally different. Like, it's like, they draw the comparison because of the medieval setting and then the dragons, but then, like, it stops there. Like, all the races in Westeros are they're humans. There's one not races, just species. There's one species. There's never been any other elven lords or anything like that. Now, there were, like, the first men in the Andals who are said to be kinda like bigger humanoids, but they were still just humans. Like, they weren't like elves and orcs and all this weird stuff. Now, I guess you do have the White Walkers, to be fair.
And the giants, right?
Well, not the giants, but you did have the little I
Ho
just
Ho
remembered the little
Hodor,
gr Hodor was just a big dude. He's not
but what
necessarily a
but
giant.
remember the giant that was in the that came from the
Oh,
north?
no,
It
you're
was
right. In the North,
yeah,
yeah, they had giant
yeah.
giants, that's true. I completely blanked on that. See? I've read the books. I don't like some stuff has just escaped me. So they did
Yeah.
have some giants, but they were
But the
dead, and it
focus
do
the
what?
focus primarily the focus is on the human characters.
Well, yeah, that's the thing too, like,
Very
during the era Game of Thrones is set, the giants have died off. Like,
mhm,
we know that the giants that we saw that live beyond the wall at this point, he was that was the king, and he was like those, like, 3 or 4 they were, like, the last ones that anyone knows of. And then you have the little green, little what are they called? The little green things that were, like, throwing fireballs was Bran and Bloodraven
yeah.
beyond the wall. You had those, I can't remember what they're called, but those were also the last of their kind. So maybe at one point back in who however many centuries ago when the Andals were here before all the kingdoms of Westeros came and whatever, maybe all that stuff was going wild. Maybe there was a lot more mysticism. The world we were introduced to in the books is this. It's like
Mhm,
it's this setting. We've never really had any books going into how this world was back when all that stuff was at its height. Like, where it's kind of that's honestly kind of make Game of Thrones very interesting in a lot of ways because you got to think we know all that stuff does exist in this world, but something wiped them out. Like somehow they lost. And I mean, we're led to believe that it was just the White Walkers. Like the White Walkers were the reason that a lot of like the Andals died and there's no more giants, even though ironically the giants live beyond the wall where the White Walkers are. So yeah, that's why you're all dead. Maybe not live with your enemy. You'd probably be around more. But then the little green folks, like they were killed off by the White Walkers. So like it's interesting because we never really got to see that world. So if George ever finishes these 2 damn books, he could maybe go back in time and tell, like, his version of Lord of the Rings, like, the super high fantasy world of Game of Thrones, the old republic, if you will, of Westeros, which would be kinda cool.
do you think George, when he passes eventually, that he will allow or will he pull Lucas and sell the rights to it to somebody else to continue the stories after he's gone?
Maybe. I think it would
Maybe.
honestly depend on if he met the right
Person that would
person. If he's not finished
right
with it.
caretaker, yeah.
Yeah, because like, with George, it was kinda like he was in an interesting position to where, like, he got to tell the stories he wanted to tell. Like,
Mhm.
his original idea for the original trilogy, like, he said, like, he wanted to be able to include, like, the stuff that happened in the prequels. Like, in a perfect world, he would have done all of that, and that would have all been done originally. Granted, he as the years went by, he added a shit ton more stuff, right? But, like, the general idea of, like, showing a younger Anakin and all that stuff, like, he did have that in his mind at some point while he was doing the original trilogy, and George R. R. Martin's not really in a place like that just because he hasn't finished the main story of Game of Thrones. So, like, I that's the part that's kinda up in the air. Like, if he was done with the last 2 books, I could see him selling it at that point, just letting someone own the IP, but I don't know, like, I would imagine just based on I don't know if he what sort of, like, family members he has alive, in his household. I don't know if he's if married or has children or just has, other family. Like, because I imagine he'd probably just leave it with them, but then they would just probably end up selling it anyway. So I think if he doesn't finish the books, I don't know. I guess he could probably sell it. But I think in a perfect world, if he could meet like his own Dave Filoni esque guy,
Mhm.
he'd probably give it to them.
Yeah.
Ironically, but I don't know. At this point, I'm sure HBO and WB would pay him handsomely to sell the IP while he's on his deathbed
Oh, oh, sure.
or prior. Like, I'm sure if he just went to him now and was just like, "How much you want to give me just to own it?" David Zavlav would he'd put down the axe and he would come and be like, "How much do you want, George?" Like, what do you?
Here, here's
How
a
many
check. I've signed.
zeros? Yeah.
I've signed it. You fill in the
Yeah,
number.
exactly. Just like I'm gonna start writing zeros. You just tell me when to stop. Like and like that would happen. I'm sure anybody would,
Yeah.
honestly. But HBO would be the first people in line because they don't want to lose this IP. That's for damn sure.
Yeah.
Oh man, yeah, but it was great. It was a great episode. I don't know if there's anything else I need to bring up. I don't know. Where are you at with it? What do you think as someone who hasn't read the books? Because I have an idea. I mean, generally know what's going on. So what do you? I don't want to just spoil it for anybody, obviously. So like, what do you think's to come if you had your best guess for like the rest of the season? Like, what do
I
you
mean,
think the
I
roadmap
don't kn
is?
like, clearly there's going to be a moment where Viserys has to make a choice. Like, he has to say, "This is my heir," and it's going to be an extremely challenging just conflict for him. I don't know what the right word is. It's going to be really rough on him when he makes that, when he has to publicly declare that, because he is now told um, Rhaenyra that he's all in for her. He's going to stand behind her. She's his choice, and that she's got it. And he said, like, on the memory of your mother, or on in the life of your mother, or something like that. Yeah, yeah. He basically swore it on the life of his wife,
He
and
gave his word.
so for him to go back on that, I hope that he doesn't go back on that. But it's Game of Thrones.
Yeah, no
It's
spoilers like involved. Yeah, obviously. Like, who knows what's gonna happen?
so I don't think it's going to be quite as rosy as that just happens. I
To
think
that point, dude,
what would
before I
be what
forget,
okay,
did you notice during this scene, because you're saying, "Oh, it's Game of Thrones, we don't know what's gonna happen." They were playing undertones of the theme for the Red Wedding when they did
really?
a wide shot to when he gets, like, super drunk. I might be crazy, but I heard it. So don't quote me, but I'm 80% sure when he was
Right.
getting real drunk and he looked out to the crowd and it got like kind of everything kind of slowed down for a minute and then all the sound was kind of fuzzy because he was drunk and he was
Yeah.
watching it all happen. They were playing the God damn it, what's the song
Raise
called?
of cash.
The Rains of Casterly Rock, yes. They were playing that song. Like just not the whole thing, but there were undertones of it, just to like the notes. Some
Mhm.
chords were thrown in there. I caught it. I might be crazy, but because I even thought to myself, like, generally having an idea of where this is going, I was like, wait a minute, are they trying to insinuate a red wedding vibe to the audience right now? Because that's really funny because like I'm sitting here thinking like that should not be happening. What are they doing? Like, so I'm wondering, I feel like it was intentional if they did it, or I'm just crazy. One of the two. But sorry to interrupt. What were you saying?
I mean, so that's kind of I anticipate that being the it looks like from the preview of the next episode, it looks like maybe things are going to start coming to a head in the next episode, and maybe that like and then the after thing that they said that the three characters that this episode launches them forward for the rest of the show. So I I feel like it's all coming to a head sooner rather than later, especially with the jumps that they're doing. Um, but yeah, my guess is that he tries to name her and it doesn't go as he hoped, and that they end up with he may be backed into a corner and naming his son somehow. So we'll see.
I'll tell you what. Again, this is spoiler free because I genuinely don't know if this is what's going to happen, but I don't think that's going to happen until he dies. I think
Well,
that's the crux.
that was the other thing that I thought just, prior that I was gonna say a few minutes ago was that, or what they do is they do the unexpected death, and he
Yeah.
kicks it before he actually confirms her as his heir, because it seems like since his son has been born, there hasn't been any kind of declaration from him about who is supposed to be taking over. So, I could see them getting taking him out of play, and then him dying, and then everything's left in turmoil and kind of up in the air.
Yeah, if I like again, I don't know if this happens, but I see him dying just randomly without having the chance of like telling everybody what's going to happen. That's
Speaking
what
of
I
which,
envision in my mind.
he had the sore on his back in the first episode that
Mhm.
we have. I don't think we've touched upon since.
Nope.
Are we to believe that that's been cured, or are we just kind of ignoring that right now? Like that seemed
No.
like a thing,
No,
and it
yeah.
never came back up.
Well, it did and it didn't because what they did instead was show that he got that second wound and it
Hmm.
also isn't healing. So then that makes you believe you take the logical step, at least in my mind, that well, that wound's not healing. We already saw the other wound, so that's two wounds that aren't healing. So then has he gotten more wounds that we just don't know about? And so he's just rotting at this point? Because like because the whole thing too, like I don't know if you know this since you're not a book reader, but they do like say this in the original show, but like Aegon made the Iron Throne to be like a symbol. The reason it's made of all the swords and stuff, and they mention it in the show. Like Viserys tells Rhaenyra, like the throne is the most dangerous seat in it's the most dangerous chair in the kingdom, or whatever, the seat in the kingdom, or whatever. And it's not. It's metaphorically and literally because like there's a whole thing to where like if you sit on the throne and the throne cuts you, it's a symbol that you're not worthy to be on the throne. So that's why when,
Okay.
like, Damon was, like, showed up in the first episode and he was essentially committing treason or blasphemy at the slightest when he was sitting on the throne,
Sure.
but he didn't get cut by the throne. And if you noticed when Viserys got cut, he was, like, leaning one way, like, to the left here, and, like, he put his hand down on the left, and, like, that he keeps getting cut by the throne. But then Damon, if you notice, they played this well. Damon always leaned to the right, and Viserys always leans to the left, and he keeps getting cut. But Damon leans to the right, and he doesn't get cut by the throne. So it's just like one
Yeah.
of those things. And then they say in the original series that like anyone who says like who has to state that they are the king is not worthy to be the king. And
Hmm.
Viserys in like the first or second episode just said like, "Am I not your king?" Like, and it's like, well, anybody who has to state they're the king to prove their point isn't really fit to be king. And like that's kind of like the sad story with Viserys in a lot of ways because like Viserys is a good dude. Like Viserys makes the best decisions he can possibly make. He does everything he can. Like and like I feel like anybody in his position would probably logically make a lot of the same decisions. We have the gift as an audience of foresight, so we know what all the other characters are thinking. We know what all the other characters are doing. So every time we see Viserys make this decision, we're just like, "You're a fucking idiot, dude. What are you doing? Why would you do that?" Like, obviously, you should marry the 12-year-old, duh. Like, you know what I mean? And it's, like, so funny to, like, have to say that shit, but it's like, we know, though, like, as, like and even that's one thing I actually liked about this episode too, is he acknowledged that. He acknowledged that failure because Rhaenyra called him out on that shit. You remember
Mhm.
that in the
Oh,
throne
yeah.
room?
Oh,
Because
definitely.
she was like, "Dude, if you were trying to play the game or whatever, you're trying to make a political move for power, you should have married whatever her name is, the 12-year-old."
Yes. Yes.
And he was
And
just like,
he said, "You're right."
yeah, he was just like, "Yeah, you
Yep.
you got me. You definitely should have." And, like, I like how he segued that into just like, "And you should do the same thing. You should marry who you wanna marry, but do it to, also do it to strengthen your political stance. Like, find
Mhm.
someone good that you're perfectly willing to be with. Just make sure they're gonna actually strengthen your claim. All right, like, that's all I ask. Is essentially what he was getting at. So
Yep.
this was like Viserys's best episode. Like, it
Oh, by
was so good.
far, yeah.
He was great in it, like, and it's so funny because, like, every time I see him, like, tell me if I'm wrong. Every time I see him, it's really hard for me not to see Paddy Constantine just as his character in Hot Fuzz. Like, but this episode was the first time where, like, I was like, "That's just Viserys now." Like I thought he did a really good job. They gave him some shit to do. He wasn't just making dumbass decisions, like, the thing was, though, again, I was like I said before, like, he knows it was better than him just starting to make good decisions. He acknowledges that he made bad decisions, and god damn it, he's just gonna make sure they work, and I respect
Mhm.
that. I respect that more than him just wanting to say, "Fuck it, it's Aegon now." Like, nah. He said it. He said Rhaenyra's queen, so god damn it, that's my heir. And, like, that takes a lot more balls in all honesty, because he knows the easy way out. Everyone knows it, but he's choosing not to, and I like that.
Sure.
I think that's great. Oh, man. It was good. So, what you got anything
So,
else you wanna add?
no, that was we covered, just about all of it, I believe. So,
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of anything else. I thought it was great, though.
yeah,
I'm very
I mean,
pleased.
every time Game of Thrones ends, I always go, "It's man, I wish this was like a Netflix show and they just dropped them all because I don't wanna stop watching." Like, I want the next one.
I
But
like being able to
that's a
wait,
smart
man. It
well,
is.
ultimately, yes. Ultimately, it's more rewarding
It is, because we get
but
to speculate. We wouldn't be able to do these after shows
well,
if they
and
just dropped them all.
you also get to live with and really
You
I
get
think it
invested.
helps you invest you in the characters more
Yeah.
to think about, well, why did he do this and why do you do that? Instead of just jumping right into the next episode and being told, oh, this is why he did it or seeing why they did it. So,
Yeah, you
you know,
get no time to, like, I love binge watching shows just as much as the next person, but you just don't get to spend time there within your own thoughts, you don't get
yeah,
invested. You just absorb the content, and then you move on. And
yeah,
then, like, a week later, you forget everything that happened. Like that's literally, like, I would probably, if I had to take Game of Thrones trivia, which I have won a Game of Thrones trivia on a Carnival cruise, I have a trophy to prove it, so just saying. But if I had to take Game of Thrones, like, OG Game of Thrones trivia versus explicitly season 4 Stranger Things trivia, I would only win at the Game of Thrones one. Like, I just, over time, even though that was so much longer ago, I became so much more invested in that show because I had to spend years and years and years watching it. I didn't just
mhm,
watch a season of it in 2 days and then forget about it for 3 years until the next season comes out or whatever it was. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
it's, like, shitty having to sit there and wait all the time. I totally acknowledge that, but, like, it's so much more rewarding in the end, I feel like, and it's better for them too, just to you get to build the hype. You build the
yeah,
hype, it goes on for longer, more people subscribe to your service. It's just there's so many more benefits. We get to talk about it for a week.
yeah,
Like, just as fans, like, it's like, it'd be great if, we could just watch it all, but, like, it's kinda fun just being able to talk to a lot of people. Like, as like a that's why I was able to become a global phenomenon. Like, it just through like, it just kept catching on, word of mouth was like, "Oh, have you seen this?" And, yeah, everyone's talking about it, you don't know what's gonna happen, even though you could just go read the books, but nevertheless, everyone's just talking about it, and it just keeps just it's a snowball effect, and it's
Perfect.
exciting, like, I've after watching this episode, man, I'm way more excited to see where this goes, even like I've said, subconsciously knowing kinda where it goes. This was just such a good episode of television. Man,
Yeah,
I'm just happy about it. It was good.
I agree.
Super excited. That was my I don't know, I feel like I went on tangents a couple times, so that was a tangent there. That was good. That could be its
It's
own clip about why you should go week to week and not do day and like, the drop all your stuff at once, Netflix. That could be its own clip. Clip incoming. That'll be a clip. Nevertheless, you wanna go ahead and sign off? You got anything you're good? You don't got anything else you wanna bring up? Because we can go ahead and sign off, call it a night.
Yep, yep, I'm good.
Alright, well, John, let everybody know where they can find you online.
Over on Twitter, Nightwing_J. I'm also doing the occasional, very the operative word here is occasional thing on YouTube at Fixing Fandom. You might find some stuff over there, but that's it.
I feel that, dude. You can follow me just at Sir Rob Bifo here, and I mean, we do these after shows every week, so as long as this show's on, immediately after the show airs around 10:30 PM Eastern Time, we'll be here doing the after show. Every Friday, we've been doing after shows for She-Hulk, and now we'll be able to include Lord of the Rings into that. I hope that picks up so I can be just as excited about talking about that on an after show, as opposed to just being kinda, I don't know, I want the show to be good. It's got so much potential. I don't think anybody could argue that, like, Lord of the Rings is goddamn, there's so much potential for that show. Look at the movies. They could be amazing. So I hope that show picks up and we don't have to keep having a negative comparison to House of the Dragon and Lord of the Rings. We'll see though. But nevertheless, so come back every Friday and then the clips go up from the streams as well. So be sure to like and subscribe so you can get all that stuff. You don't have time to watch stream, but nevertheless, we will see you next time on the next stream, be it Friday or Sunday for House of the Dragon. But until next time, like and subscribe.